Thanks.
Time as any, Mr. Newman. Take her down to periscope depth.
Yes, sir. Clear the bridge. Dive.
Stand right.
And greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. Some of you are rejoining me from my two earlier streams today. The first stream today was kind of exciting. I had the chance to showcase a peer-reviewed press release, so-called whatever you call it, communication, whatever. It's not a full research article. That was really good news, as I was privileged to be a part of a team of great researchers, some of whom were creationists or ID proponents. The others, as far as I know, may have totally secular viewpoints, but it was a glorious thing to do science. And then earlier today, I did a stream on James Downard, one of his claims in his debate with John Maddox. So what all this is about, and let me say greetings here to Godzilla Freak, is that unlike most debates where the opponents don't really reveal what they're going to say, I'm going to do that today, not because I disrespect James Downard. In fact, my respect for him has grown over time. He has a sharp mind. He's he can be, he doesn't hold back punches, but he plays fair. I've analyzed his debate with John Maddox on the topic of intelligent design, and obviously I'm going to use a different tactic. So John Maddox debated him on the topic of intelligent design about a year and a half ago. And I want to thank John for doing a strong reconnaissance in force. I got to see how James Downard, his reasoning skills and how he debates. And as I said, I felt he was a straight shooter. He certainly, I considered him much more civil than Matt Dillahunty. Matt Dillahunty was just a rude mess. When he lost his temper when he started to lose on points. So he made up for it with just kind of rhetoric and theater, but no substance. James Downard, I thought, used a lot of very piercing questions. And he'll probably be one of the toughest opponents I've ever faced in terms of his mental skill and his quickness of mind. So why am I doing this? My goal is not, debates are for advertising for me, for my channel, also to show the world that I'm willing to face my critics. And also I'm willing to get some correction. So if James sees something I say wrong and he confronts me about it, I'll say, hey, thank you. Thanks for the editorial review, because if you don't mind, I'll put you in the acknowledgments of my book for all that you helped improve my points. That's part of the reasoning that I'm doing this, and so we'll just go forward with it. There hasn't been an agreed upon format, but I'm presuming it's going to be very similar to the format that James and John Maddox had. Now, there were some really sharp questions that James Downard gave. Now, if he throws me the same curve, I have a response for them, and I expect he might have something new. So we'll just see how it plays out. And this is also practice for me to see how I can put together my thoughts. I've been on travel a lot. In fact, I just missed John Maddox. I was driving through Nashville this week, and I just missed him. I had to visit my family out in Memphis, Tennessee, and so I drove through Nashville, Tennessee. My sister's husband is very ill, and gravely ill, and we cherish, just like with my mom, we cherish every day that a loved one is with us. But the doctors have said that they didn't expect him to live this long. So I wanted to visit her and support her, because she just lost her mother, and her husband now is gravely ill. Plus, we're trying to take care of a little business to help prepare to settle Mom's estate, as I'm the executor. So in addition to the heartaches I've faced this last month, I now have headaches to deal with, being the executor of Mom's estate. So why don't I try to get this together? So I know why I brought that up. I didn't have a chance to, I didn't really have a chance to slap together an actual slideshow. And it was kind of in my head what I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to see if I can put my opening in 10 minutes. Let's see how successful I am at that. So that's the first thing I'm going to try to do. So let me cue this up, and I will insist. I'll say, James, as soon as the slide is up, James Coons, that is, tomorrow, that's when you start the clock. Don't start the clock while I'm trying to click and get your get his Zoom system to work. Because one time he took like 2 minutes off because he's fiddling with the controls. It's like, that's not really fair. So I'm going to have to remind myself to insist that he starts the clock. So hopefully the system won't die when I bring this up. Give me one moment. The streaming software is a little finicky. Sometimes it just dies spontaneously. I should have set up a backup, but I didn't. But let's see if I can get through this. Actually, just for safety, I'm gonna put a backup. Hang on, I should have done this earlier. But I'm gonna send I'm gonna create an invite to my other computer so that I can, in case we have a crash, I can recover gracefully, hopefully. So let me. Apologies for the delay here, but I just remembered I should have done this earlier. So if you guys have any questions in the side chat, please alert me. And questions and comments if you have any pointers. So let me just get this going, and then just a minute here. See if I can get this started. I should see I should be getting joined shortly. Fabulous. Okay. So this B here that's showing up is not, it's just the backup computer. All right, we're ready to go. So let me share my slideshow now. And the topic of the debate is evidence of intelligent design. So this is starting at, let me write this time down, it's at 11:12. So I'm going to define intelligent design and also contrast it with creationism. And intelligent design was probably well articulated by Paley, goes back all the way to the time of Cicero. And I will have a show on that on my channel on the history of intelligent design. But the idea is that if someone encountered a watch, Paley, they call this Paley's watch. If someone encountered a watch, just like say on a heath or somewhere out in a field, you would presume it's designed. And so that's a very simple design argument. If you come across something that's complex like a watch and the way it's put together, it's designed, intelligently designed. In fact, books like The Blind Watchmaker actually use the title to try to argue against Paley. So that defines basically the idea that we're debating tonight. There are modern versions of intelligent design. It avoids or minimizes the relationship of intelligent design to a deity. There may be political reasons for this related to the public schools, but also there are atheist forms of intelligent design and space alien designs. I'm going to focus on Paley's version of design, and I just need to put a note for myself for tomorrow. There is Paley's book on intelligent design called Natural Theology, Evidence of a Deity. So the differences between creationism and intelligent design: creationism does assume intelligent design, but we can say colloquially, creationism says the world is intelligently designed and intelligently cursed. Some forms of creationism devote a lot of time to the question of Noah's flood and the age of the fossils. And it deals also with the problem of evil. And Charles Darwin said, "What a book a devil's chaplain might write on the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel work of nature." And that was actually a criticism of intelligent design. Creationism tries to answer that theologically. And then also young earth creationism has a timeline of events. Intelligent design does not necessarily have a timeline of events. It just says something is designed. And it's famously, again, the idea of intelligence is represented by Paley's watch. I'll point out something about the design argument. The design is detectable or identifiable without knowing when and exactly how an artifact was made, how the design was made. And I know because James Downard will harp on that when and how, and it's like, that's not the point. It can be, you can detect a watch as being designed. You don't know all the, one doesn't have to know all the details of its manufacturing process. Oh, greetings, David Neff. Let me say hi to David. So do we have examples of clocks in the present day? Here's a precision clock. Microseconds in the BAT sonar. Microseconds. That's a pretty good clock. And then another one. This was written by Nobel Prize winner Aziz Sankar, The Intelligent Clock and the Rube Goldberg Clock. And he talks about the various clocks in biology. So we could say there are watches in biology, and one of them is really good, the microsecond clock and the BAT sonar. Now, there are these contrasting problems. There is a lot of problem in the world. There's a lot of wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel works of nature. So that would argue against intelligent design. But on the other hand, we have physicists like William Bielek, who say life is more perfect than we imagine. He delivered that lecture at Cornell, 2015 Hans Bethe Memorial Lecture. And let me just read this clip here from Natalie Angier. Photoreceptors exemplify the principle of optimization an idea gaining ever wider traction among researchers, that certain key features of the natural world have been honed by evolution, and I would say design, to the highest possible peaks of performance, the legal limits of what Newton, Maxwell, Pauli, Planck, et Albert will allow. Scientists, that's a reference to Einstein, by the way, scientists have identified and mathematically anatomized an array of cases where optimization has left its fastidious mark, among them the superb efficiency with which bacterial cells will close in on a food source, the precision response in a fruit fly embryo to contouring molecules that help distinguish tail from head, and the way a shark can find its prey by measuring microfluxes of electricity in the water at a tremulous millionth of a volt, actually should be millionth of a volt per meter or something, strong, which, as Douglas Fields observed in Scientific American, is like detecting an electrical field by a standard AA battery, with one pole dipped in the Long Island Sound and the other pole in the waters of Jacksonville, Florida. In each instance, by a physicist have calculated the system couldn't get faster, more sensitive, or more efficient without first relocating to an alternate universe with alternate physical constants. And so this is an example of design. Can it happen naturally? Now, I mentioned creationism. Creationism does attempts to address the problem of, a cursed world with all its blundering, cruel works, and then reconcile it with the intelligent design. Intelligent design doesn't deal with the problem of evil and problems in the world, but it is consistent with the idea that biological systems have very advanced technology, such as described here in Natalie Angier's article. So let's just back up a bit and talk about God. So as I said, the kind of intelligent design I'm working from is Paley's, which was an argument for God, not exactly the modern version that kind of minimizes talk of God. So let's start with the laws of nature, and I'll point out this function here in quantum mechanics, this psi function here. And that's been of interest because if we take psi and we have something called the universal wave function, there have been various comments on this. And so without any theological baggage, just straightforward deductions from physics, we can postulate reasonably, not to the exclusion of other theories, but that God exists. And here's an example from F.J. Belinfante. We thus see how quantum theory requires the existence of God. Of course, it does not ascribe to God, defined in this way, any of the specific additional qualities that the various existing religious doctrines ascribe to God. Acceptance of such doctrines is a matter of faith and belief. If elementary systems do not possess quantitatively determinate properties, apparently God determines these properties as we measure them. We also observe the fact, unexplainable but experimentally well established, that God in his decisions about the outcomes of our experiments shows habits so regular that we can express them in the form of statistical laws of nature. This apparent determinism in the macroscopic nature has hidden God and his personal influence on the universe from the eyes of many outstanding scientists. Now, I know some physicists will totally disagree with that, and that's fine. But the point of me putting this on the table is that reasonable interpretation of the laws of physics allows for the possibility of God. It could be a legitimate fact of reality. Now, we may not actually be able to run any direct experiment, but I'm just, as long as we can postulate that this God exists, he's eternal, he's omniscient, all-powerful, to the extent we see things in biological systems that would reflect a super intellect, such as the ones described by Natalie Angier here, then that would be evidence of intelligent design and designed by some sort of deity. There are others who have sympathy to, at least in what they've said, to Belinfante's views. Belinfante was referenced in my physics book on statistical mechanics and thermodynamics. There is someone from my alma mater, Johns Hopkins University. Here's the reference here. He argued also for God in his essay in Nature. He didn't use the word God, but in his other essays he does. He's a deist. he doesn't advocate kind of like the personal intelligent design of the creationists. But still, this is a deity. And there are other physicists, they're in the minority. And so I would say that there is a mechanism that can affect the designs we see in nature. So in the discussion section, I'll talk about some of those evidences. All right, guys. So that's my opening 10 minutes. Do you have any comments? Because it really is a lot to demand of someone to try to make their case in just 10 minutes. So when we go into the back and forth, and I know what James Downard, I mean, I wouldn't say I know what he's going to do, but if he plays this like he like he engaged John Maddox, I'm going to try to deal with that. So RJ's specialty is feathered dinosaurs. Or RJ, I'm sorry if you're listening. I haven't really paid attention to your work, so I don't know what your specialty is. I think it's something with a dinosaur or mammal or bird transition. And apologies, I'll give you a chance to state what your specialty is. So if we're on one thing that, let me minimize these here. One thing that John Maddox let RJ Downard get away with, RJ Downard just played the interrogator the whole time. And I would have said, hey, time out, equal time. If you ask a question and you go at length, you're going to give me about the same time. So I'll say, okay, how about we agree to this? 10 minutes, you can interrogate me and I'll try to respond. And then I'll do the same to you, James Downard. So that's the first thing I'd say. I'm not going to let him just, sit in the position of judge and jury for the entire, it was like an entire hour and a half. I'm just like, John Maddox, that's so not you. Usually you're the one who's just kind of harassing the other side. And I'm going to say, hey, James, this is only fair. You have 10 minutes and you can ask me anything. I'll do my best to answer, and I'll try to be a straight shooter, and I expect the same of you. And I'll have 10 minutes. So that's the first thing. So the way he was just grilling John Maddox, that's not going to happen. If I can help it, I'm going to point that out. If he starts pulling that on me, I'm just going to say, that's not what I would expect of this debate. Now, John Maddox put up with it, which was really surprising to me. And since then, John has become kind of like an RJ Downard and being the one that interrogates everyone in his debates from that point on. So we'll just see how that plays out. I want to be fair to Mr. Downard and show respect to him. But so that's the first thing. So I would bet that, okay, so if usually I probably would go first because I'm arguing the affirmative. So then Mr. Downard, RJ, I'll call him RJ because there's so many people named James, I'll just call him RJ. No offense intended there, Mr. Downard. I'll just call you RJ for at least the sake of this stream. So RJ will go second, and then I guess I get to go next. And this is going to be my first question. I'm going to say, now, RJ, you've said that there's no evidence of intelligent design and whatever. Why don't you look at this topoisomerase and tell me what you think? Do you think this could arise by random chance, a combination of mutation and selection? Very simple. And you know what my playbook is going to be. There are 4 or 5 proteins. I'm going to just do this, and I'm going to say, what's the relevance of your dinosaur to your reptile to mammal or whatever transition? Because he was just grilling. John Maddox let him get away with saying, you have zero interest in this, and if he said that, I'd say, well, It's true. I have very little interest in your work. It's just not compelling. It's not high tech. It doesn't address the questions like the ones I have here, because I think I study cooler things than you do. Okay, that's not a very nice thing to say, but he was, he was teeing off on John with comments like that. I'm just like, I'm not going to let him get away with it. I'll say this is much more of interest. And by the way, there are a lot more researchers that take priority of this. And to my knowledge, a lot of the research teams, and I happen to have the privilege to have worked on one, and I talked about it on my channel because there's a recent publication associated with my work. To my knowledge, a lot of these research teams want biochemists and chemists and computer guys and physics guys and engineers. They don't have a lot of use for paleontologists. Sorry. I know that was mean. So RJ, if you're listening, I probably won't be that mean unless you start slinging some mud my way. Okay. So just a warning there. And so I will show.
Let's consider what happened.
This, and I'll say how does your evolutionary theory and your nested hierarchies explain this? So here we go. Let me see. And some of you know this is like one of my favorite examples, and for good reason. And it is an enzyme that I study. Oh, let me before I move on, let's see. Okay, let me try. What is the actual debate topic? I don't think it was verbatim. Is there design? Is there evidence? Is there intelligent design? That was the title. That's all I got on the emails. We don't know if we're going to be talking about biological evolution or abiogenesis. I'm ready for both. I'd rather talk about, I'm ready for both. And so evidence of design is the debate title. And now, I mean, the full debate can't get any feedback without knowing this. So this isn't the first time this happened. In my debate with Matt Dillahunty, no one actually defined what version of Pascal's wager we're going to argue. And that got Matt pretty angry because he didn't like my version of Pascal's wager. And he flipped out. So if there is, Patrick, I have no complaint with that. So this should be entertaining to see where it goes. And if both James and I can kind of think on our feet. Do you know when and where the debate is taking place? If so, when and where? It's on Modern Day Debate tomorrow at 5 p.m. That was what I last heard. So this Debate Armageddon, and they called it initially Debate-ageddon, but I guess that was a funny title. But it's going to start at 11:30, the first debate. The second debate has not yet been scheduled. Who's going to participate? The third debate is me at 5 p.m. And after me is T-Jump and Nathan Thompson on Flat Earth. Okay. So if you don't want to watch the Flat Earth debate, I have a show on the history of creationism and ID tomorrow night. Yeah. So if it has been stated what the debate topic is and it's changed from what I have just said, it's like, well, I didn't get any message from Mr. Coons. All right, SpongeBob. $18-ish, 17-ish, Eastern time, 5 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll just see where it goes. But I'm going to say, okay, how do you... Debate-ageddon. What I'll also say, and I need to point this out. Let me write my notes. Argument by contradiction. Let me just pause this here. Argument by contradiction is not argument from ignorance. Argument by contradiction is not argument from ignorance. If I said, I don't know how a tornado could pass through a junkyard and assemble a 747, that sounds like an argument from ignorance. But if I said we would not expect a tornado passing through a junkyard to assemble a 747, that's an argument by contradiction. So anyone that is assuming that premise that a tornado can make a 747, you can show that that's unreasonable, and therefore you can reject the premise as being true. What I'm attempting to show is that the natural processes, and I showed the laws of nature with those equations, those second-order differential equations that describe much of the physics that underlies modern technology, are not sufficient to describe the designs we see in biology. And one of the reasons is that it has inherent disorganizing principles, or things at the very least that will not organize things into the structures we have, because the chemistry does not dictate that it's going to be one thing or the other. There are all these degrees of freedom. There are all these degrees of freedom of how it's just like a bag of fair coins. There's nothing that makes it inevitably all heads or all tails. It would be all these degrees of freedom that it could be either heads or tails. And with every coin is an additional degree of freedom. And so systems with more and more parts, such as the 747 or a topoisomerase protein, have there's no chemical or physical inevitability in its construction, apart from, like, say, a blueprint, like, say, DNA providing a blueprint, and then a system that will implement the blueprint and assemble the parts. We do not expect these things to arise in a primordial soup or naturally at any stage. And so I'm not making an argument for ignorance. This is an argument by contradiction. I need to point that out. This is an argument by contradiction. And I will show some contradictions if we assume random mutation and natural selection. So this is just a very short video, and I have some really good videos. So Mr. Downard, you better be ready. I have about 30 minutes of videos. I have so many proteins, and I'm just going to replay the same playbook. But let me just start off with topoisomerase here. This is only 2 minutes.
Happens as DNA
All right. Thank you. Hopefully we won't have that snafu tomorrow, and I'll double check the sound. So let's try again.
Let's consider what happens as DNA unwinds during replication. As DNA unwinds, it acts like this rope when we pull apart its two strands. As you pull the strands apart, twisting tension builds up in the rest of the coiled portion. Let's consider what happens as DNA unwinds during replication. As DNA unwinds, it acts like this rope when we pull apart its two strands. As you pull the strands apart, twisting tension builds up in the rest of the coiled portion. It is actually adding one twist to the remaining rope for each twist pulled out of it. At some point, you can't separate the strands anymore. The remaining rope is too tightly twisted. If you relax your tension on the rope, it will twist around itself in a supercoil. It is releasing tension. If you want to keep pulling the rope apart, you have to release the tension periodically, and one way to do this is to cut the rope and splice it back together. This problem has been best characterized in small circular DNAs. There are two methods of dealing with this problem in DNA. One cuts only one strand of the DNA double helix, and the other cuts both strands. Let's look at the first. Topoisomerase I enzymes cut a single strand of the double helix, pass the other strand through the cut, and reseal the break, relaxing the overwound molecule, which now has one fewer twist. Topoisomerase II enzymes do the same thing but with both strands of the double helix. Topoisomerase II cuts both strands of a double-stranded DNA and passes another double strand through the break and then reseals the break. So if a molecule of DNA is supercoiled, topoisomerase II can remove the supercoiling, 2 twists at a time, to yield a relaxed circle.
Wasn't that totally awesome? By the way, the topoisomerase II is the subject of the publication I mentioned earlier today. It's a really cool enzyme. And so I'm going to say, all right. In fact, I need to quote that thing from Darwin, that if there's any system, I have to find that quote. So I put it in my notes here. I need to write it. I need to find that quote. They can't be assembled in individual parts. So the topoisomerase is a dimer. So the first thing is that, let me see if I could find it. Topo, and I need to put this. See, this is really good practice for me because I could see where I could kind of get a little better at doing this for tomorrow. So this is a nice dress rehearsal. The topoisomerase actually has 2 parts. Let me see if I could share it. It's a 2-part, 2 identical parts, just kind of like a pair of scissors, have to come together. And as you can see, that it really does look like it operates like a pair of scissors. So let's say you have that you evolved the pair of scissors first without the ability to ligate or reconnect the DNA or untangle it before you reconnect it. Okay, so let's just hypothetically say you have the cutting part. And so you have this enzyme that's just going to go through and shred all the DNA, and it's not going to reconnect it. So it's not going to untangle, it's not really going to, well, technically it could untangle it, but then you just shred the DNA and it's useless. Creature's dead. Natural selection can't evolve something dead. Or let's say it can ligate, that is reconnect, but it doesn't cut. Well, that's useless too. Or if it cuts and ligates but doesn't untangle, that's useless too. So there are at least 3 things. And then not only that, this thing has to evolve such that the complex works only when 2 of them connect together. You have to have all the connections there. And let me show. Oh, I need to put a slide for the connections. Let me write that down. In the topoisomerase, there are about 54 connections, and I'll show a slide on that where I identify the connection points. That was actually part of a paper I'm working on, and I'll explain the methods. But that's a lot of connection points. It's not easy to see here in this what we call a Richardson ribbon diagram, but there are a lot of connection points where there are all sorts of positive and negative charges. In fact, let me see if I have a slide for this. Oh, I need to show a slide that shows the connection points. So I'm just gonna improve this a little bit. So this is a good dry run because I can actually make this argument stronger. And I'll say, James, how did that evolve? You'll say, I don't know. You know, I'm sure he'll say, I don't know, but that's an argument for ignorance. I'll say, no, that's an argument by contradiction. I just pointed out why it can't happen incrementally. It has to be all there. Do you agree or disagree? And at the very least, if you say, I don't know, so then there are lots of really sophisticated designs that can't be accounted for by either an abiogenesis or evolutionary process. And it's, in fact, unreasonable. And I'm just going to hammer him on this, and then he'll have a chance to grill me on ID and all, and let's just see how well I fare on that. But I'll say, well, what's the relevance of your dinosaur mammal transition or your reptile mammal transit? It's like, what does that have to do with solving problems like this? Let me show another diagram here. And I'm going to talk about eukaryotic evolution most likely. Let's see if I could show this, if you'll forbear with me. So this is good practice for me. So now so I can make these nested hierarchies. This is a nested hierarchy of the topoisomerase through various creatures. I said, what does this nested hierarchy, how does that solve the problems? I'd say that's the problem with evolutionary theory. They'll present this as the best evidence of evolution, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problems. What does this nested hierarchy have to do with proving how this could evolve? And I'll even show that it would be hard to evolve it from bacteria. And he argued in his last debate that bacteria is the first, and then presumably the eukaryotes the next. And I'll say, okay, if we're evolving a bacteria from a bacteria to a human, we have to insert this localization sequence. And I'm going to cover that. Do you all want me to cover the localization sequence? Let me see if I even have it in my video, in my slideshow. Let me stop this. So let me see. Let's see. I'll just start here. I hope everybody's having a nice day. Even if you need if you need any prayer, let me know. Oh, God bless you, Patrick. We all need prayers. You can pray for the debate tomorrow. There are not really a lot of Christians that come to modern day debate, and if there's some that come, I'd like to be able to be of service to them, especially. You're confident in your arguments when you run a script. Zach, congrats on your work. Oh, yes, thank you. And congratulations also to the team. There were a lot of people who worked on it. I had the privilege of being a part of them. Better than I did, all of us. If it said natural selection already worked. Okay. A failed prediction from Darwin. That's good to point out. The other day, someone cited predictive power to me as if that favors common ancestry somehow. So this will be interesting how this plays out. So let me see if I have. This may be over everyone's head, and I don't know that I could do it efficiently. Let me see. Because talking about nuclear localization sequences, that's going to be dicey if I do that. Let me see if I can have it here. I have to practice whether I can talk about nuclear localization, because this is one of these things that is just so technically demanding. It just might totally fly over everyone's head. But this is a discussion of why there can't, if there's universal common ancestry, if you're going from a bacteria to eukaryote, I'm going to have to practice this, because this is actually pretty devastating. It's very hard to evolve one architecture like a bacteria to a eukaryote. And I'm just like, yeah, this could take half an hour to describe the relevance of this diagram to that evolutionary scenario. But it relates to the fact, let me see if I could just think out loud, and maybe I'll close the stream soon so I can actually work on this. But I know what I need to show. Let me show the nuclear import-export. Another cool video, and I'll say this is what has to happen in the eukaryote. And all right, so let me, if you will indulge me here for a moment. Let's see. I'm going to look for a nuclear import-export. All right, nuclear import. Okay, I think I have a strategy here to make this. So I'm kind of doing this on the fly because I didn't have adequate time to prepare this. So this is a opportunity for me to actually compose on the fly, and then maybe we'll close the stream after I get through this, because people don't realize that you can build all these nested hierarchy diagrams, and I'll point out I built this one. It's easy, and it overlooks serious problems. And I'm going to highlight one of those problems. So just briefly, let me see. Eukaryotic, and prokaryote. So if we're evolving, let's say, a eukaryote from a prokaryote, so I'm going to show this. I'm going to have this in my slideshows, so I'll be prepared to debate evolution. And oh my goodness, if James wants to, if he's going to let me also talk about abiogenesis, so I'm going to talk about eukaryotic evolution and abiogenesis. It'll be like a 1-2 punch, and I don't think he'll know what hit him with the eukaryotic evolution. This is just devastating. In fact, I shared this with a Christian who believed in evolution. He was a biology student. I didn't talk any theology with him. I just talked about the prokaryote-eukaryote transition. And I said, you see, common descent requires miracles that are indistinguishable from special creation. So what's the difference then? Just as easy then to believe in special creation. The only difference is that evolutionists will claim that their theory doesn't require miracles, but then when you identify all the transitions that have to happen, you realize that needs to be miracle. So let's talk about the difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes, because Mr. RJ says that there is a, we humans, our ancestors were these creatures here, these little prokaryotes. And you'll notice we humans have cells like this, represented by this, eukaryotes. There are these things, these are like little membranes here. So this is the DNA here in this see that little stringy thing? You can't even see it in here, but that stringy stuff, the DNA is in here, and it's enclosed by this thing called the nuclear membrane. It's just like packaging. Hopefully there are no problems with that. But what has to happen is stuff needs to go in and out in a controlled, regulated way. And that's it. In order, the way the nuclear, the nucleus is able to discriminate what goes in and out is it has these things called nuclear localization signals and nuclear export signals. And I'll show what a nuclear export signal looks like. See if I could find it. So we have the spelling of the DNA. See if I could show it here. So you see what's highlighted in red? So this is kind of this is the spelling of the topoisomerase. In one section has this code. It's just like a password, a little bit like a password. This is on what's called the C-terminal domain, and it's a bipartite nuclear localization signal. I'm going to show this. I'm going to show how this little password is in action, okay? And so if we're evolving this topoisomerase going from a bacteria to a eukaryotic cell, first off, you have to create the nuclear membrane and then what they call the pore complexes and then everything that is associated with that. We can go in detail. And if he challenges me on that, I'll start saying, okay, let's name all the pieces. And one thing I know is that his co-author, Jackson Wheat, he and I kind of debated on this. And I said, well, how does it go in and out of the nuclear membrane? How does stuff go in and out? And he said it just leaks. And I just want, I did my nice guy routine because I could have said something snarky and say, you need to study more cell biology. That's not how it works. That'd be a disaster. But anyway, let me show this. Let me see if I can load the video. Oh, here it is. Nuclear pore complex. Okay. So I'm going to show this video now. Let's share it as a Chrome tab. Audio.
The nuclear pore complexes are the only channels through which small polar molecules, ions, and macromolecules can travel between the nucleus and the cytoplasm. By controlling this traffic, the nuclear pore complex plays a fundamental role in the physiology of all eukaryotic cells. Most proteins and RNAs are too large to move through the complex by passive diffusion and must move by an active process in which appropriate proteins and RNAs are recognized and selectively transported in a specific direction. Let's consider proteins imported from the cytoplasm to the nucleus. Only a subset of proteins can enter the nucleus, and they are allowed in by virtue of having specific amino acid sequences called nuclear localization signals. Nuclear localization signals typically consist of 1 or 2 short segments of basic amino acids. Nuclear localization signals are recognized by nuclear transport receptors called importins, which carry the cargo proteins into the nucleus. With its cargo attached, importin binds to specific nuclear pore proteins in the cytoplasmic filaments. By sequential binding to more interior nuclear pore proteins, the complex is translocated through the nuclear pore. At the nuclear side of the pore, the complex is disrupted by the binding of a protein called RAN to importin. RAN carries a molecule of GTP. This binding changes the conformation of importin, which then releases its cargo protein into the nucleus. The importin RAN complex is then re-exported through the nuclear pore. A protein in the cytoplasm called RAN-GAP, for GTPase activating protein, stimulates RAN to hydrolyze its GTP to GDP, an action that triggers RAN to release importin back into the cytoplasm. RAN plays a key role in protein import and export. Note that while RAN is bound to GDP, it cannot disrupt the binding of importin to a cargo protein. In an action that prevents the depletion of RAN from the nucleus, the RAN GDP formed in the cytoplasm is transported back to the nucleus by its own import receptor, a protein called NTF2. In the nucleus, another protein called RAN-GEF, for guanine nucleotide exchange factor, stimulates RAN-GDP to release its GDP and pick up GTP. In this form, RAN-GTP can disrupt the binding of importin and its cargo, triggering the release of the cargo in the nucleus. By the actions of RAN-GEF, found only in the nucleus, and RAN-GAP, found only in the cytoplasm, a steep gradient of RAN-GTP and RAN-GDP is maintained across the nuclear membrane, with RAN-GTP inside the nucleus and RAN-GDP in the cytoplasm. Similar to imported proteins, proteins are targeted for export from the nucleus by specific amino acid sequences called nuclear export signals. Nuclear export signals are recognized by receptors within the nucleus called exportins, which direct protein transport through the nuclear pore complex to the cytoplasm. RAN-GTP promotes the formation of stable complexes between exportins and their cargo proteins. Note that this same form of RAN does the opposite for importins and their cargoes. The effect of RAN-GTP binding on exportins dictates the movement of proteins containing nuclear export signals from the nucleus to the cytoplasm. Following transport to the cytosolic side of the nuclear envelope, GTP hydrolysis and release of RAN-GDP leads to dissociation of the cargo protein, which is released into the cytoplasm. Exportins are then recycled through the nuclear pore complex for reuse.
Excuse me. Thank you for the feedback, Godzilla Freak. I might just limit it to 2 minutes, so I might cut out part of the video. But what I wanted to convey is that this isn't simple. If evolutionists are just going to show us these nested hierarchies, I'm going to challenge them and say, how do you account for that? Because what I just showed, with all that, that is not, and if James doesn't understand it, I'm happy to walk him through it, because this is not his specialty, and I respect that. His specialty's reptiles and dinosaurs, and I wouldn't understand anything he says. So I'll try to treat him respectably, because he represents people that might be on the fence, and I'm not gonna try to insult him or denigrate him. That's, we're just gonna talk facts. But there is something. Let me see if I could show this diagram again. Oops. So the point is, even just making this change in the eukaryotic cell, we're not even talking about all these organelles, these membrane-bound organelles. That's a whole nother story. But let's just say that we now have a membrane. I'm just going to point out to the audience, you see that this, the idea that this is incremental is just silly. How do you have gates that don't work? The first time it doesn't work, the cell's dead. Okay, you can't evolve something that's dead. This doesn't happen incrementally. And so we saw all these mechanisms of all the machinery involved in taking proteins and moving them across there. Very orchestrated. This leaky membrane stuff is just nonsense, in my opinion. You can speculate it, but that's not proof it would work. And I specifically highlighted the topoisomerase. So let me go back to the topoisomerase. So I don't know if you all remember to talk about a nuclear localization signal. So let's see if I have that. The nuclear localization signal, so that it acts like a password that's going to let things go in and out of the cell. Excuse me. So here's that. This has to be inserted and spelled correctly if we're going to evolve it from a bacteria to a human. And the point of me even showing this is that what evolutionary biologists do, let's see if I have this. I'm going to clean up my video here. What they do is they said, oh, we can build these trees. That proves it descends by common ancestry. I said, that totally doesn't account for any of the changes I just highlighted. And in fact, that sequence change would just be glossed over by these diagrams. And that may be a very subtle change as far as this diagram goes in creating these trees. So that spelling change in the sequence here, see if I could show it. So this is good practice for me. I'm going to try to clean up this presentation. So the bacteria spells that area this way up here, and I'm going to maybe put it there so it's easier to see. And then like in a human, it spells it this way. It has to be a very precise respelling because it has to function as a password. And we don't know how precise it has to be, but it can't be, it has to be enough to actually help it work. This is a non-trivial change that all these phylogenetic trees don't account for. Not to mention, just because you could build a phylogenetic tree, it doesn't mean a nuclear membrane can emerge in such a way that it can utilize this spelling change in the topoisomerase. or that those import-export proteins will emerge. That's just ridiculous. So you can't use these phylogenetic trees to argue that this is proven or even feasible or reasonable. So even in the ID community, we have people like Michael Behe that nominally accept universal common ancestry, but he would invoke intelligent design along the way. Similarly, Stephen Meyer, who is, at least several years ago when I interviewed him, seemed to be friendly to common descent, but it would have miracles along the way. We call that progressive creationism. I'm not a progressive creationist, but I could see the line of reasoning there. So if one accepts Old Earth and the fossil record, you'd say, okay, common descent, but there had to be miracles of transformation along the way, and we don't know how those miracles would happen. I don't accept that theory, but I'm just pointing out the assumption of universal common ancestry doesn't automatically mean that the designs are accounted for. And so topoisomerase is one example. The nuclear membrane is another example of a very difficult transition. And then we have all this fine tuning that's at the edge of physics. We have, again, going back to Paley's watch, we have clocks that are microsecond precise in bat sonar. It can't do its visualization because for it to visualize depth, the distance that sound travels, I can understand why it's microsecond precision. The distance that sound travels over a short amount of time enables the bat to perceive the depth and shape. That's why it has to be precise to the microsecond. It wouldn't be able to do visualization, which is another thing. Anyone who's built a sonar and you're just sending out sound waves and then you're trying to assemble a physical 3D picture of your environment, that is non-trivial. Not to mention this bat is flying around and being able to navigate. If you tried to build a drone to do that, that would be a tough engineering task. That's why a lot of people that are engineers are sympathetic to ID, because they build these things and they're like, wow, whoever made the bat. So if you made a sonar, if you worked on a sonar system, and I know people that have, like Naval Academy graduates who worked in submarines, and they see how the bat does sonar or the whale does sonar, it's like, that was a pretty good designer who built it to be able to do all that it's doing. Common ancestry does not explain that. Those phylogenetic reconstructions don't explain that. Natural selection, I pointed out some of the problems with natural selection explaining that. So this is my criticism of quote unquote mindless evolutionary theory. And if James Downard wants to play the abiogenesis game, you saw an earlier presentation where I called him out on doing his Dave Farina imitation. So I look forward to the debate tomorrow and a chance to showcase my case for intelligent design, and also my critique that evolutionary theory and its phylogenetic reconstructions do not explain the design. At best, they may argue for common ancestry, but common ancestry to affect these designs would require miracles, indistinguishable from special creation. And that's basically it. So thank you for you all in the chat who provided me a live audience to practice, and I see where I can brush up and clean up my presentation. And I look forward to, maybe it's also a chance to promote my channel and say, if you want to learn more and you want to be nerded out, come to my channel, because I'll nerd you out to death. And that's it. So let's see how long we've been going, for an hour and 4 minutes. So this has been, that'd be about the length of the debate. So I'd like to say hi to everyone, and let's see, Nicholas is here, and to doubly apply your point, I'm able to follow most of the technical details, specifically because I'm an excellent high school biology teacher. I think what really helps is the visualizations. because I was looking at some of these. If you see how it's presented in a biochemistry textbook, you're like, what does they say? This connects to that, this connects to that, this connects to that, this connects to that. Happens after this connects to that. And you're just like, what? But when you see it in a cartoon, you can actually, you get the overall picture. And see, there's someone else. Oh, Zach. Yeah. It's nice to see you again. Amazing how that nuclear membrane evolved just like that. What a stroke of luck to have all the right codes. Exactly. All the proteins that would be shared between the bacteria and that eukaryote would also have to have localization signals fortuitously, miraculously placed in them in the right location in the protein. We don't, one can guess how many amino acids it might be. It can't be trivial. And then you have to have like all the important, not to mention the nuclear pore complex itself. A lot of them require like 100 proteins. So none of this is trivial. And I'm like, so if James Downard tries to do what he did to John Maddox and say, you have no interest in it, and I'll say, yeah, because the stuff I just showed is way more cooler than this transition, in my opinion. And the research teams that work on this have no need of paleontologists. Sorry. Yeah. So everybody, thank you for joining me. And this is a good rehearsal. And there's definitely stuff I could clean up for tomorrow. And given how quickly the time flew, I think I might only have just a little time to cover a few things in that short debate. Now, if we have a Q&A and this thing goes on for 3 hours, I think I could have a field day just showcasing all that God made. Not all. Oh my goodness, that would take forever. Showcasing a few of the things that the intelligent designer, the Christian God, has built for all of us to declare his glory. And maybe just to tie all this together, let me read Romans chapter 1, and we'll close the stream with the word of the Lord. So what I have presented, and thank you SpongeBob for the well wishes. All the best tomorrow. I hope RJ doesn't engage in hand waving. But why do we study these things? Why do we study these things? Because we can learn about something about God as we study these things. And we'll close with Romans 1:18. The Apostle Paul writes, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made." Glory and honor to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Thank you all, everyone, for joining me this evening, and thank you for all your support and prayers during this challenging time in my life. Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. Amen.